Hello everyone, welcome to another podcast video. Today I have a few things I want to talk about, but the first video that I'm making is completely unscripted. I had planned to sit down and record a specific episode today and just do a bit of bulk recording. And as I was lying in bed this morning, literally as soon as I woke up, these thoughts just flooded into my head. And I knew that I had to speak about them because I knew I was going to be speaking about God, about faith today, as always on this channel, on these podcast videos, on these short form videos. And I'm just going to put the other stuff to the side for a minute. Please bear with me because I really don't know what I'm going to say, but I've kind of prayed over this and I really trust that what's supposed to come through is going to come through. And I don't know if it's going to be of any value, but I know that if it's from God and if the Holy Spirit is working through me, then of course that is of value. I don't know how much of that value I'm going to give, but I'm just going to try and be a channel for those downloads that I just received this morning. So it was actually about grief, and I don't know why this occurred to me. Well, I kind of do know why, because I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of my dream. It was a bit abstract and strange, like random things. You know, when you have dreams and like there's people you know and there's their faces, but they've got a different body and they speak differently, and it's just everyone's like colliding at once. It was one of those dreams, but there was a few people in that dream that are there now that have passed away. So one of them being my granddad, one of them being my best friend's grandmother, and one of them being an ex-partner. So the ex-partner is not someone who has physically passed away, but just someone. I kind of use that as the example because thinking about grief and thinking about the things that came subsequently from this dream, I feel like it's all intertwined. So when I say that there's 3 people in it that have passed away, of course the ex-partner hasn't passed away, he's still alive and well, I hope. But on the subject of grief, I think is very relevant because this is someone who I had to go through a whole grieving process over, but it really was like a grieving process. A lot of death happened, a lot of ego death, a lot of emotional just bleeding and energetic, just complete cleansing and healing. And so it kind of felt like a death in and of itself. And even how that person is viewed in retrospect, it kind of feels like that as well, which might sound morbid and strange, but that's how it feels. Anyway, so dream aside, I woke up, I was like, okay, cool, that's nice. I always like dreaming about people who are dear to me who have passed away, because even though I'm thinking about them constantly and they're always in my heart and minds and thoughts and prayers, there's something about dreaming about them that feels almost real, because you're connected to your senses, but you're outside of this earthly realm for the however many hours you're dreaming, and realistically time doesn't exist when you're in that realm. So anyway, I digress. But the thoughts that came to me as soon as I woke up were, you know, that quote that is always circulating? Well, not always, but I heard it recently, and I think there's a lot of quotes about grief and things like that, but I don't always resonate with all of them. Sometimes it's like, yeah, that's nice, but it doesn't really, like, you don't really feel the depth of it. But one quote that I've always loved is along the lines of, grief is the price that we pay for love. Grief is the price that we pay for love. Grief is love with nowhere to go. That's it. Grief is love with nowhere to go. And that quote just hit me when I woke up this morning. And I had this sudden realization that when you are born, from the moment you are born, for the most part, from the second that you are born, even before, because God knitted you together in your mother's womb, But from the moment you are born and that you are brought earthside, all of that unconditional love that God has for you, and unconditional isn't even the word because it implies that there is condition and then it is made unconditional. But those boundaries, those limitations are non-existent for God. So unconditional doesn't even merit God's love, but that's the only way that we can humanly comprehend it. So that seemingly unconditional, but really it's just all-encompassing. It's just love. It's just the essence of his creation. It's what he is that has been poured into your specific creation. When that energy that has created you as a soul is brought earthside and your mother gives birth to you and you are literally taken through the birth canal, you are brought from heaven, from the upper realms, whatever you perceive it as, and you are brought earthside through the center. All of that all-encompassing love of God that he poured into you when he was creating you is now kind of drifted out to all of your relatives, all of your family, all of the people that are going to hear about your birth, from your mother and father who created you to distant relatives who live on the other side of the world. Everyone that is affected in some way by your birth. In that moment, they're going to feel unconditional love, and it's going to be resemblant of the love that God poured into you. And the reason it's now unconditional is because that's how we can humanly perceive it. But because we can humanly perceive it like that, that's because we do have limitations. And so from the moment you are born, constantly throughout each phase of your life, you could go really esoteric and say, kind of like the setting of the sun and the dawning of the moon and all of that kind of stuff, that it's in constant flux. But I'm going to just talk about it in the stages of your life. Throughout the stages of your life, some of that unconditional love is getting taken away through grief, because the people that were there to love you and who did love you unconditionally, whether it's an immediate family member or a distant relative or someone that you've never even met, that might have been a colleague of one of your parents before they had you. That unconditional love is slowly gonna, teeter away and trickle away through grief. And I'm not talking about because we do things that put more conditions on the ability to be loved, although I think that is a thing. And while that exists, at the same time, that shows that, again, that the word unconditional doesn't suffice our Father in heaven, because doesn't matter what we do, he will love us without condition, because the condition was never there to begin with. But what I'm talking about specifically now is that every single person that will ever unconditionally love you is there when you're born. And as you go through life, as you become a toddler, then you become a preteen, a teen, in your 20s, 30s, every decade or however long, sadly, but such is life, people will pass away and people will rejoin their Father, our Father in heaven. And a part of that unconditional love gets taken away. And again, it's nothing to do with you, but it's simply to do with the fact that when you were born, that unconditional love was at its fullest capacity. And so it can only ever slowly go down, simply because those people are going to become less and less and less physically on this earth with you in this lifetime. And that is such an accurate depiction of grief for me. And I feel like that is something that as soon as I thought of it, when I was literally lying in my bed this morning, it brought me so much relief almost. Grief is never ending. It's not even like healing is unlinear. Grief is just never ending. You are constantly grieving when you're grieving a person. That grief never ever leaves you. It just takes on new forms. And when they say grief is love with nowhere to go, this is kind of my reimagined version of that. With that unconditional love, however, as it slowly teeters down, as you get older, you're going to grow and you're going to shift and alchemize that unconditional love that people who have now passed away once had for you. And you're going to be alchemizing the love from that specific person and from each of them into unconditional love for someone else. So that might one day be your child, or you might be the aunt, you might be the uncle, you might be the godparent, you might be the distant cousin who lives on the other side of the world. But you will take a fraction of that unconditional love from each one of those people that held that for you when you were born, who have now passed away. And you will take it dependent on their relationship to you. So if it was your grandfather, for example, then you would feel that same thing for your grandchild. Or if it was a distant relative that you didn't even know you exist, that you didn't even know they knew you existed, if that makes sense. Then you're going to take that, and then you're going to feel that unconditional love. Even if it's a relative that you don't know has been born, it's going to be poured out there. And that's kind of, thinking about it now, that's how I think and how I see God's love without condition, God's all-encompassing, endless love that is definitive of his existence and thus of his creation of us. I feel like that's how that is felt and kind of rippled out into the human realm. And so grief is love with nowhere to go. Yes, it is. Yes, it so deeply is. But having this shift in that perspective, I think it enables you to transmute that and realize that that love is constantly flowing and it's just taking on different forms, just as the grief is. But if you know, and it's not even about trying to do it, but if you know that you will take the unconditional love that someone had for you that now feels like a hole in your heart, even if you're not crying about it every day anymore, even if it's been decades, but that void is still there, that grief is still there, and it feels humanly in the mind like love with literally no place to go, knowing that as you speak, that unconditional love is being transmuted in you to one day be replicated into another human being that will be brought earthside through the unconditional love of our Father. So I hope that message translated well. I hope I did God justice with when he kind of gave that to me this morning, and I hope it resonated. I would love to know how that landed with you. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, and yeah, until next time, may your breath be relentless, may your spirit be exalted, and may your joy be contagious. Bye for now.